大家好，我是天怡。今天是5月22号，星期四。曼哈顿区的区长李文今天来到法拉盛，跟这个亚裔媒体讨论一下他要竞选市主计长的一个政纲。
I was just talking to Grace about why there are so many people with mental health problems on the street in New York City, and partly it's the history of America and New York largely closing its psychiatric hospitals. There was a scandal in the 80s, and someone snuck a camera into one of these hospitals, and there was very terrible conditions and a lot of abuse. And instead of fixing those conditions, they started closing the hospitals. In Queens, you might know Creedmoor.
Yeah.
In Manhattan, there's a very large hospital on Randall's Island. That's the main, it's called the Manhattan Psychiatric Institute. That's the main state, the only state psychiatric hospital for Manhattan. When you cross the Triborough Bridge, you see it. These facilities had 4,000 patients. Creedmoor had almost 5,000 patients. Today, Creedmoor has less than 400. And the Manhattan Psychiatric Hospital went from 4,000 to 400. And so the difference there is what you see on the street. It's people who might have, in a different era, been in a mental hospital, and psychiatric hospital, and now they're left on their own. And one of the things I'm fighting for as comptroller is to start investing again in long-term inpatient care so that people have an alternative to the street. With the same problem in like Bellevue Hospital, which is the main facility for mental health treatment for the whole city. If you need to stay longer than 2 weeks, they have an extended care unit. Would you like to guess how many beds are in Bellevue's extended care psychiatric unit? The main one for all of New York City? 19. That's it. Only 19 beds. And so it's very hard to get admitted there. And even in cases where police officers bring a mentally ill person in off the subway, for example, into Bellevue, in most cases they're sent back out to the street in a couple of days, in part because there's no long-term bed for them in the hospital. And look, that's directly under the control of the city budget. Bellevue's a city hospital. And I'm going to fight really hard to get the city budget investing again in those kinds of inpatient services. And I think it's going to change New York City. The estimates of the number of people on the streets in New York City with untreated mental illness is about 2,500. Now, to me, that is a manageable number because I cited one facility, Randall's Island alone, that had 4,000 patients and now is 400, excess capacity of over 3,000. A similar drop at Creedmoor. There's vacant space at Bellevue. So I think we could solve this problem, that we could bring people in for long-term treatment. I think it will change New York City. And I think it will directly impact the Asian American community in New York as well, because so many of the anti-Asian hate crimes, as most hate crimes, are committed by people with mental illness. 大家好，我叫李文, or if you prefer Cantonese, 大家好. In Cantonese, it's Layman. Doing my best, or as you might say in K Radio, 안녕하세요. It's very nice to see all of you. I'm very grateful that you've come. We are here to really focus on the needs of the Asian American community in New York City, and why I think the Office of Comptroller can and must do more to support the Asian American communities of all 5 boroughs, and all the ways I'm making that a centerpiece of my campaign. This job I'm running for, Comptroller, is not so well known, even by people who follow the news closely, but it is an extremely important job for New York City. It has control of our pension funds, which amounts to $280 billion, really an astounding amount of money. that we can use to invest in New York City, and I want to talk about that. It has oversight, investigation, subpoena power, audit power over the mayor and every agency of city government. So really, it is the main way of keeping the mayor accountable. Makes it the second most powerful job in New York City. It also has the power to review and certify every contract. The city gives out $40 billion a year of contracts. Too few of that going to Asian American owned businesses. We're going to talk about this. Those contracts are reviewed by the comptroller's office. And many more powers. It would be important at any time, but at this difficult moment for New York, where we have a very severe affordability crisis, where the cost of housing is the highest it's been in New York City history, where it's very hard for young people in particular to find housing. This office is more important at a time when we have real public safety challenges, when we see people who should be in long-term mental health treatment crashing out onto the street, into the subway, in the parks. We need a comptroller who will invest in long-term inpatient mental health care. These will be my priorities. And it's a job really I've been preparing for my whole career. And I want to talk about my background for some of you who don't know, but I studied physics in college, and I became a math and science teacher in the Bronx, in District 7 at a junior high school. And I believe deeply in education. Also a proud parent of two boys who have been to the public schools. I went on to found a community development financial institution, a community credit union that is in Washington Heights. That's like a cooperatively owned bank. It's made $100 million of small loans in northern Manhattan in Washington Heights, and it's helped families buy home computers, start businesses, pay for education, and much more. So I know what it is to manage payroll, to read a financial statement, to manage financial assets. I neglected to mention my educational background also includes a graduate degree from Harvard University, where I, among other things, I was a graduate teaching assistant in corporate finance. So between my background in physics, my background founding and running a financial institution, and my academic background in finance, in many ways I've been preparing for the job of comptroller my whole career. I won election to the New York City Council in 2013, representing Uptown Manhattan. I chair the Parks Committee. I'm very devoted to park space and green space. I chaired the Health Committee during COVID. I also chaired the Jewish Caucus, and I'm very active on Jewish issues. And I think in many ways, the Jewish community and the Asian community have so much in common. Common interests, common interest in education, concerns about the rise in hate crimes, two very entrepreneurial communities that are concerned about the business climate, and pretty proud of how we've supported each other during the last few years, that when there's been anti-Semitic attacks, the Asian community has always been the first to stand up and denounce it and stand with us. And certainly, I think that when there's been anti-Asian violence, the Jewish community has also stood up and embraced you. And I think this partnership is very important to New York City, and it's something that matters a great deal to me as well. I'm now Manhattan Borough President, and in that role I have the honor of representing the original Chinatown in New York City. I know we love Flushing, and we love Southern Brooklyn, but it all started on the island of Manhattan. I also have the honor of representing Koreatown. And yes, I know there's a lot of Koreans in Queens, but K-Towns in Manhattan. So I feel very close to the diversity of the Asian American community in my role as Manhattan Borough President. In that role, I have an appointment on the panel for education policy. This is a somewhat obscure body, but it makes policy for the schools. I have a vote there. And we had a very important vote a couple months ago related to specialized high schools, which I am a supporter of. Stuyvesant High School is in Manhattan, after all. And the vote was to authorize the admissions test contract for this year. And there was controversy. It's called the PEP for short, PEP. And it was unclear whether there would be votes to authorize this contract. I cast the deciding vote. My appointee cast the deciding vote in favor of approving the contract for the admissions test for specialized high schools this year. Happened to be the only borough president who did. And it's a sign of how much I believe in the importance of specialized high schools and really academically accelerated education in general. But I've been able to provide funding every year to Stuyvesant to help them build a new computer lab. I've attended their fundraising gala each of my 4 years as borough president, including 2 weeks ago. The other elected there was Congressmember Grace Meng. Education is very important to me. Specialized high schools are very important to me, and I'll continue that agenda as comptroller. I want to talk about some of the other ways I think this job can matter to the Asian American community. I talked about the $40 billion of contracts which New York City gives out every year. It's an astounding amount of money. Everything from renovating a school to providing food in senior centers to foster care services to cultural events. These are all, we have a way of ensuring that some of these contracts go to more diverse businesses. It's known as the Minority Women Business Enterprise Program. MWBE is the acronym. And we measure how many of those contracts go to MWBEs. About 17% of city contracts go to MWBEs. Even less if you look at it on a dollar basis. 17% of the total contracts, but only about 5 or 6% on a dollar basis because they tend to be smaller contracts. But then the question is, what is the breakdown amongst MWBEs? Because that includes white women, it includes women of all backgrounds, and men of African American, Latino, Asian American, Native American, etc. So it turns out that less than a third of MWBE contracts are going to Asian Americans. So if you do the math, if only about 6% of the total budget is going to MWBEs, and only about a third of that is going to Asian Americans, it means only 2% of the contracts New York City is giving out are going to Asian Americans, despite the fact that this is a large and growing population. I want to help fix this. And the Comptroller's Office is an important vehicle to do that. We are going to provide audit and oversight of every agency in New York City government and rate them on their progress on, thank you so much, Walter, on MWBE contracting. We will also, wherever possible, attempt to break out the contracting by demographic subgroup to really tell the full story, not just to know MWBE, whether we're achieving MWBE targets overall, but to understand whether we're achieving those targets for each group. We want to achieve them for every group, including Asian Americans. This is something I will fight for as comptroller. There's also the question of that very large pension fund I mentioned before, which, as I mentioned, it amounts to $280 billion. And it's important that the companies and investment professionals managing that money reflect the diversity of the city, and they don't today. But these are enormously important contracts to manage pension money. There are firms which are managing tens of billions of dollars, single firms for New York City. So this is a very big deal. Again, Asian American-led investment firms are underrepresented in the allocation of pension fund management. So I want to work on this as well. I want to use the power of the office to ensure that we have the full diversity of the city, including Asian Americans, represented in who gets city contracts, and who does business with New York, and who manages our money. this is something I will fight for as comptroller. I think, but I'm confident that the Asian American vote is going to be decisive. And I feel that if I win the Asian American vote, it will be enough to push me over the edge to win this race. So this community is very important to me and will be critical down the home stretch in the last 30 days of the race. First, I have a plan to invest some of the pension money in affordable housing, which I think is the top priority in New York City right now. And this was the first plan we put out in my campaign. We think that there's about $2.8 billion we could invest in affordable housing that would produce as much as 70,000 units. I also think we can and should go farther on MWBEs. And we have put out a plan that first, we will give every agency a letter grade on its performance on achieving MWBE targets. And we will push for a breakdown by demographic groups. This is not currently happening to the degree we would like. But we'll also work to ensure the comptroller's office itself sets a good standard, that our own team and the consultants that we use to contract with fund managers and the fund managers themselves match the diversity of the city. I think we have more work to do on that front. And while I think it's fair to say the current and previous comptrollers made progress, we need to go farther, and I will. Thank you.
So I see this one, the taking on Trump and Musk. So in February, the federal government rescinded $80 million in FEMA funds.
Yeah.
Means multiple emergency shelter and service in New York City.
Yeah.
So what role should the comptroller play in preventing such funding losses? And how could you strengthen oversight of federal funds if elected?
This is a very important question because we actually do depend on the federal government for a significant part of our city budget. About $8 billion a year is in direct federal grants. Education is the largest. We get $2 billion a year just for our schools, but many other city agencies. And the Trump administration and allies in Congress have made it clear that they want to cut healthcare funding. They want to cut funding for food assistance. They want to cut funding for schools and more. And I'm very worried about the budget that was passed in the early hours of this morning that would, among other things, cut Medicaid, because it'll be a challenge for families that depend on it. Also, it'll be a challenge for our hospitals, which are dependent on Medicaid funding. And you referenced an incident which I think was clearly illegal, where the federal government went into a city bank account, money that we had already received, a contract we had already delivered services on, and took the money. One might even say stole the money. And that is clearly illegal. And I want to give credit to the current comptroller who noticed it and sounded the alarm. And now we are in court, we are suing, and I think we'll be able to get that money back. But you need a comptroller who's going to be aggressive this way. But there's more. We need a city budget that has the strongest possible reserve fund now, so that if there are cuts in the coming year, we have a reserve fund to maintain critical services. And I was very disappointed that the mayor, in the executive budget that he proposed, did not add any money to the reserve funds, not a penny to the reserve funds. And I think that leaves us exposed. If there are cuts, we want to have reserve funding to be able to plug those holes to keep services, whether they are healthcare or education or more, from enduring cuts. So these are all things I'll fight for as comptroller. Thank you. Yeah. First of all, it's not just the Asian American community that's not very familiar with the comptroller's office. I think a lot of New Yorkers probably they vaguely know what the name is, but not much more than that. But you correctly identified one of the most important powers, which is oversight over every agency and contract review and approval. and that's the power I will exercise. And I want to say that I've been very dismayed at how the city has handled the Chinatown jail, that it has made numerous promises that it didn't keep to bring the community in as stakeholders, and has ignored their many suggestions for how to shape and improve the project. And I'm also quite aware that the timeline to close Rikers is no longer realistic, that the capacity problems you mentioned are quite real, and it's not an option that you would simply release detainees who wouldn't otherwise be released.
If the controller can have a say or stand or power to say that, look, this is a big problem, and then you don't, because you're the one who signed the contract, or you're the one who signed the money, so can you just like say that, oh, it's a problem, I cannot give out the contract to the contractor?
Sure. Certainly the comptroller would review all the contracts. There are certain legal criteria for when you can refuse to certify a contract. Mostly that criteria derives from the need to fight corruption. But I don't minimize that as a ongoing threat. But certainly the comptroller has influence, and through the power of audit and investigation, can point out some of the challenges which you just identified. You use the power of the office to point out how far we are off of the current legally mandated timeline to close Rikers in just 2 years. None of the borough-based jails will be ready at that point. To point out that the capacity doesn't match the current number of detainees. It's only a little bit more than half, and that leaves us with unmet capacity needs. So clearly there's going to have to be some reconsideration of the plan. That doesn't mean we don't have problems at Rikers. Rikers is a disaster. I've been there. But the current plan based on timeline and capacity is going to have to be amended. There's just no doubt about it. And I will use the comptroller's office to point that out.
So sure. Is the comptroller have the right or the power to amend it?
I think this was set in law. And so it would require a law passed by the city council and signed by the mayor to change the timeline. I think the comptroller could influence the process by first of all using the power and investigation to point out the shortcomings you identified, perhaps particularly making the case that the cost of the borough-based jails have risen far beyond what was anticipated originally, and potentially beyond what's currently budgeted for. So I think the comptroller can influence this process. Ultimately, you would need the city council to pass a law and the mayor to sign it.
So that means that you are the one that will sign the contract, you are the one that will sign to sign the contract, but at the same time you have influence on that.
Yes.
You cannot have a final decision on that.
Yes. So for example, the current comptroller, Brad Lander, refused to certify, to use the terminology, a very large contract for one of the migrant shelters, a contract with a company called DocGo, a contract that was over $400 million, very large contract. And he felt that there was a lack of transparency and that there were some inconsistencies in their execution. So he refused to certify the contract. So this is an example of the comptroller using his power, and I applauded him for that, and I would not hesitate to do the same.
Oh, okay. My second question is about shelter.
Yeah.
So you know that this is about shelter. The shelter, I'm familiar with Chinatown. Let's take 91 East Broadway.
Yes.
So the city is going to spend $300 something million on that shelter.
Yes.
What I mean is that $3 million can have, like, if this is like 50 units of the affordable housing,
right,
that means that you can helping 1,500 households.
Yeah.
But why the city or the controller allowed to take care of like 100 or 150 shelter people more than the people who need the affordable housing?
Yeah.
The money that they spend.
Yeah.
So is the controller has anything can do?
Potentially. First of all, let me say that I have stood with the community of Chinatown in opposing the 91 East Broadway shelter, because while clearly I understand we need shelters, we have a homeless problem, it's not fair that so many are concentrated in one neighborhood, and there's a very large concentration in Chinatown right now, and I think there needs to be more of an even distribution. I also feel that there's not enough oversight on the quality of homeless shelter providers, and that there needs to be stricter criteria on when we give contracts to providers and whether we renew contracts based on whether providers are good neighbors in their communities. It feels to me often contract renewals on autopilot, even if the contractor's not running a good shelter well. And look, you identified the ultimate solution here. We need housing. We need much more housing. And
because the housing is cheaper than the shelter, so why is so many shelter? But every shelter they have a contract. It's signed by the controller.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same power to review and certify every contract. And again, there are somewhat limited criteria for when you can refuse to certify, but the comptroller can be influential. And for example, producing a study that examines overconcentration of social services like homeless shelters, and forcing the mayor to be accountable to that. Pointing out the exorbitant costs that we're incurring right now in building and managing shelters, and continuing to remind policymakers and the public that we've got to do more to build affordable housing, that is the ultimate solution, that shelters are a short-term Band-Aid. The best solution is to get people and families into permanent homes.
The other question is about pension management.
Yes.
You're the one who will
that's right.
Okay, so because it's a lot, because it's an agency, so it's a lot of people pension inside.
Right.
So if the people that under the agency who is not agree with the controller who manage the pension fund, do they have anything that? Sorry, because I don't know the controllers. So do they have like input for the controller that, oh, I don't like you?
Does who have input?
For example, the teacher.
Ah, right. Yes. Yes.
So if I don't like the way that you manage the fund, so
right.
Do they or the union or the teacher can have a group that, oh, controller, I don't like the way that you? Do they have that right?
Yeah. So we actually have 5 pension funds in New York. There's a pension fund for teachers. That's the largest. There's a pension fund for police officers. There's a pension fund for firefighters. There's one for Department of Ed employees who are not teachers. And then there's a big catch-all for everyone else called New York City Employee Retirement Services, NYSERS. Collectively, it's $280 billion. It's an astounding amount of money. And the relevant unions have a seat as trustees on every pension fund board. So for the Teachers Retirement Service, there are trustees who represent the teachers union. And for the police pension fund, it would be the police union, etc. And DC 37 is the main, not the only one, but the main labor union on this catch-all fund I mentioned called NYSERS. So the city comptroller doesn't have sole authority to determine the investment strategies. You do have to work with the other trustees, but you have, I would say you have the balance of power. You have certainly significant influence.
So five pension category. How many trustee members?
Across all of them, about 60.
60.
Yeah.
Oh. Is the who or which department is going to monitor the city controller?
Right. Well.
Just like the mayor.
I believe the city's Department of Investigation has jurisdiction there. I'll confirm that. I want to mention, though, how important the fight against corruption remains. We have had a number of major scandals in recent years. The biggest one was uncovered by one of the best comptrollers in recent history, John Liu, who uncovered a major scandal under Mayor Bloomberg. It's known as the City Time scandal. This was a multi-million-dollar contract. We keep talking about contracts. Multi-hundred-million-dollar contract for managing timesheets and other human resource functions. And the contract was the contractor was essentially stealing money from the city, and John Liu uncovered it. And an example of what a good comptroller can do. He doesn't get enough credit for that. I want to call him out there. Corruption remains an ever-present threat in New York City, even in 2025, and it's why you need a strong comptroller. As for me, I just want to be comptroller. For me, really, it's a dream job. I also, by the way, could have run for re-election as Manhattan Borough President, and I probably would have, I think, had a safe re-election. But I'm stepping up to run citywide because this job is so important, and it would be a great honor for me to lead for New York at this time.
New York City public pension funds represent a significant investment portfolio. Do you support divesting from fossil fuel companies in response to climate change? Climate change. How do you balance that ethical investment to ensuring strong pension returns?
That is an excellent question. The number one priority in managing the pension fund, arguably the number one priority in the job of comptroller, is to protect the pensions for retirees, to ensure that we have solid returns. There are 750,000 current and future retirees who depend on those pensions, and it's just extremely important that we protect that. I also believe that for the long-term health of our pension funds, we should be transitioning energy investments out of fossil fuels to green energy. That I do believe that over the long term, solar and wind and potentially nuclear are going to be growth industries and better investments long term, and that fossil fuel companies are over the long term going to be declining in value. And so I think this is a case where we can do right by our retirees and do the best for returns on our pension funds long term, but also do the right thing for our climate, which is important because I do firmly believe that solar, wind, and other renewable fuels are the future of energy in America and around the world.
Thank you.
Wow.
This question from my son.
That was a question from your son?
Yeah.
Does he work in finance?
Working here.
Okay, so he's giving your son is pointing out an example of an investment in alternative energy that is a growth sector. And this was a major Wall Street firm investing in alternative energy, where there's a project to build a wind farm off the coast of New York that the Trump administration killed and now has brought back that will provide energy for 500,000 homes without polluting the environment. I mean, that's a great win for us. And once it's built, then it's very cheap to operate, so it saves money over the long term. That's the future of energy in America. I really believe that. Tell your son, is he interested in the comptroller's office?
He's responsible for this project.
Really?
Yeah.
Excellent. I'd like to speak to him sometime. He can help me figure out how to invest in green energy with our New York City pension funds. Seriously, I'd be happy to speak to him. Does he live in New York?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right.
I have a question.
Please.
It seems New York City is facing a budget shortfall right now, or budget shortfall. So, I mean, if you're elected, would you consider delaying or reshaping some larger capital projects, and how would you decide which are the most essential ones?
Excellent question. So, as of this moment, our budget is in a healthy position because we've had a good economic rebound since the pandemic, and many sectors of our economy are doing well. However, the outlook for the year ahead and the years after that raises more concerns because of the possibility of a recession, because of the near certainty of federal cuts. There are projections of as much as a $7 billion shortfall in the out years. And I think the time is now to prepare for that. And it's why I've called for increasing our reserve funds now in this year's budget so that we don't find ourselves having to make cuts due to sudden economic shocks in the coming years. Now, you asked a question about the capital expenditures, which is renovating parks and schools and housing, etc. And the expense budget and the capital budget are different forms of expenditures. And there's also concerns about the capital budget. Again, at the moment, our debt position is fairly healthy. The question is, what percent of our annual budget are we spending on servicing the debt, interest payments, essentially? And right now it's about 10, almost 11%. The target is to keep it under 15%. So at the moment, we are healthy, but here again, the out-year projections show us hitting 15%. So also cause for caution in the out years. Probably not a need to make cuts today, but I want to see us take this seriously and be a little more cautious in our budgeting, both in our expense and our long-term capital planning because of the threats long-term.